Ethan Blake awoke to the sound of alarms blaring through his ship, the Astral Dawn, as it hurtled through Zanara's turbulent atmosphere. Outside the cockpit window, swirling green clouds crackled with energy, forming a vortex that tore at the ship's hull. Warning lights flashed erratically, reflecting in his eyes as he gritted his teeth, fighting the controls with all his strength. The dense, jade-colored sky enveloped him, making the alien world below seem like a vast, uncharted ocean, its depths concealed by mist and uncertainty. "Come on, hold together," he muttered, wrestling with the ship's failing thrusters. But the damage was too severe. Something had struck him just outside Zanara's orbit, a pulse of energy unlike anything recorded in his database. He had been sent on a mission to explore new potential colonies for Earth's overpopulated regions, yet now he found himself plummeting toward an unknown planet, his fate beyond his control. With a final shudder, the Astral Dawn broke through the last layer of atmosphere, slamming into the dense canopy of Zanara's sprawling forest. The impact sent a shockwave through the trees, splintering ancient trunks and scattering flocks of iridescent birds into the sky. The ship skidded through the undergrowth, tearing a deep gash in the emerald earth before grinding to a smoking halt. Ethan groaned, pulling himself out of the tangled mess of his harness. Blood trickled from a cut above his brow, and his head throbbed with the aftershock of the crash. He stumbled out of the wreckage, breathing in the thick, humid air of Zanara. It smelled of damp earth and strange, sweet-sour plants unlike anything he had ever encountered. Around him, the alien jungle thrummed with life. Massive ferns towered over him, their fronds glowing faintly in the dim light. Vines coiled around the wreckage of his ship like serpents, and bioluminescent flowers opened their petals to emit a soft, ethereal glow. Ethan's heart raced with a mixture of awe and dread. This world was beautiful, dangerous, and completely unknown. He checked his equipment, most of it destroyed in the crash. His communicator was shattered, leaving him unable to send a distress signal to Earth. For a brief moment, panic clawed at his chest. He was alone, stranded in a place no human had set foot before. Yet beneath that fear, a part of him couldn't help but thrill at the challenge. He had always been drawn to the unknown, to the thrill of discovery. It was what had driven him to the stars in the first place. Gathering his wits, Ethan took stock of his surroundings. He needed to find shelter before nightfall, before whatever predators lurked in the shadows came out to hunt. But as he ventured deeper into the forest, he sensed that he was not alone. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled, and he caught fleeting glimpses of figures moving through the trees, tall, lithe shapes that vanished as soon as he tried to focus on them. He didn't have to wonder for long. A sharp whistle cut through the air, and suddenly the shadows came alive. A group of Zanaran soldiers emerged from the foliage, their forms blending seamlessly with the verdant landscape. They were tall and graceful, with sleek armor that seemed to pulse with the energy of the jungle around them. Their skin was a deep, vibrant green, like polished jade, and their eyes glowed with a strange, inner light, each gaze cold and assessing as they looked at the intruder in their midst. Before Ethan could react, he felt the cold press of a spear tip against his throat. He raised his hands slowly, trying to keep his expression calm even as adrenaline surged through his veins. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice hoarse from the smoke and impact. "I'm stranded." The leader of the soldiers, a woman with intricate markings etched across her emerald skin, narrowed her eyes. She spoke in a language that rolled off her tongue like a song, sharp yet melodic, incomprehensible to Ethan. But there was no mistaking the gesture she made, commanding her troops to seize him. Rough hands bound his wrists with strange, vine-like ropes that tightened on their own, constricting painfully against his skin. Ethan bit back a curse as they led him through the jungle, deeper into the heart of Zanara. He stumbled over roots and fallen branches, the alien vegetation brushing against his face as they moved through the dense undergrowth. His mind raced. What did they intend to do with him? Were they taking him to some kind of tribunal, or would he be left to rot in a dungeon? After what felt like hours, the jungle gave way to a clearing, revealing a sight that made Ethan's breath catch in his chest. So rising before him was a palace carved from crystalline rock, its spires reaching toward the alien sky like the claws of some ancient beast. The structure gleamed with a greenish hue, reflecting the light of Zanara's twin suns. Waterfalls spilled from the palace's heights, cascading into pools that shimmered with an eerie glow. The soldiers brought him through a set of massive doors, into a grand hall lined with pillars of translucent stone. At the end of the hall, seated upon a throne made of interwoven vines and crystals, was the queen of this strange world, Queen Jira. Ishra's presence filled the chamber, commanding every eye in the room. Her emerald skin glowed softly in the dim light, casting shadows that danced across the crystalline floor. She wore a gown of woven leaves and gems that caught the light like a constellation, and a crown of twisted branches adorned her head. But it was her eyes that struck Ethan the most deep, piercing green, with a gaze that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant murmur of water and the faint rustling of leaves. "You are not of this world," she finally spoke, her voice low and musical, resonating through the hall. She spoke his language, though her accent twisted the words into something strange and beautiful. "No," Ethan replied, forcing himself to stand tall despite the binds cutting into his wrists. "I came here by accident. My ship had crashed. I'm just trying to survive." Srira's lips curved into a slight smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Survival is a noble goal, but few achieve it here. Zinara does not take kindly to invaders." Ethan swallowed hard, choosing his words carefully. "I didn't mean to invade. If you let me go, I'll leave your world and never return." Her gaze sharpened, and she rose from her throne with a grace that reminded him of the predators he had seen stalking the jungle. She stepped closer, her footsteps echoing softly through the hall, until she stood directly in front of him. Ethan tensed as she reached out, her fingers brushing against the cut on his brow. A cool, tingling sensation spread through his skin, and the wound sealed itself under her touch. "You are different from those who have come before," she mused, as if speaking to herself. "You possess a strength, and perhaps a stubbornness that could be of use to me." Ethan's pulse quickened, unease mingling with a flicker of hope. "What do you want from me?" Shrira's smile widened, of something dangerous in her eyes. "A choice. Marry me, become my consort, and serve the future of Zinara, or refuse, and meet a fate far less pleasant." Her words struck him like a physical blow, leaving him reeling. Marry her. It was unthinkable, absurd. He barely understood this world, this woman who looked at him with such intensity, as if she could see straight into his soul. Yet, as he glanced at the soldiers flanking the throne room, he knew she was serious. His life balanced on a knife's edge, and the wrong answer would tip him into oblivion. Taking a deep breath, Ethan met Shira's gaze, searching for any hint of a trick. But all he saw was the unyielding resolve of a ruler who knew exactly what she wanted. He was trapped, with no way back to Earth, no allies, and no chance of surviving on his own. "I accept," he said, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. "I'll marry you, if that's what it takes to stay alive." Isra's smile softened, though her eyes remained as unreadable as ever. "Good. Then welcome, Ethan Blake, to your new life as consort to the Queen of Zinara. Your journey has only just begun." As she turned away, signaling the end of the audience, Ethan couldn't help but feel a shiver of unease run down his spine. He had made his choice, but the consequences of that choice were yet to unfold, and he had the sinking feeling that survival would be far more complicated than he had imagined. The marriage ceremony had been a blur of alien rituals and whispered words in a language that danced through the air like the song of wind through leaves. Ethan stood beside Queen Jira in a grand chamber deep within the crystalline palace, surrounded by the emerald light that seemed to flow through every part of Zinara. For the air was heavy with the scent of strange flowers, their petals releasing a sweet, intoxicating perfume that made his head swim. Ethan struggled to focus as Zinaran priests, clad in robes woven from shimmering vines, chanted in low, rhythmic voices. The language, ancient and lyrical, resonated through the chamber, rising and falling like the tides of some distant, otherworldly sea. The priests moved in a circle around Ethan and Shira, scattering golden powder that sparked and twinkled as it settled into the air. His mind drifted, caught between awe and disorientation, as the full weight of his situation pressed down upon him. Shraya stood close to him, her presence commanding and enigmatic. Her green skin glowed faintly in the candlelight, and her gown, woven from the living flora of Zinara, shimmered with every movement. She wore her crown of twisted branches with an ease that spoke of her long reign, her expression serene and impassive as she observed the ceremony unfold. Yet when she glanced at Ethan from the corner of her eye, there was a flicker of curiosity and interest that seemed almost personal. The final words of the chant echoed through the chamber, fading into a deep, expectant silence. The priests stepped back, bowing their heads, and Shira turned to face Ethan fully. Her lips curled into a smile, but her eyes remained inscrutable. "By the rights of Zinara, you are now my consort, Ethan Blake," she declared, her voice carrying a strange musical resonance that made the words feel heavier than they should. "From this day forward, your life is bound to mine, and you will serve the throne as its protector and ally." Ethan nodded, his throat dry. He felt the weight of the Xenarans' gazes upon him, their expectations, their skepticism, their thinly veiled hostility. He could sense their doubts. To them, he was an outsider, a curiosity at best, a threat at worst. He forced himself to hold his head high, refusing to let the fear show. If he was to survive in this world, he would need to prove himself, not only to Shira but to her people. As the ceremony concluded, Shira motioned for him to follow her out of the chamber. They walked through the palace's winding corridors, their footsteps echoing against the crystalline walls. The palace seemed alive with a faint, rhythmic pulse, as if the very stones were breathing with the energy of Xenara. It was a beautiful place, but its beauty was cold, aloof, much like the queen herself. Shira led him to a smaller, more intimate chamber with tall windows that opened onto a balcony overlooking the alien jungle. The view was breathtaking, an endless sea of treetops, illuminated by the soft glow of bioluminescent flora, stretching out to the horizon where the twin suns dipped low, casting a twilight glow across the sky. Ethan couldn't help but stare, caught between wonder and the growing realization that this world was now his home, for better or worse. Shira observed him quietly for a moment, her expression softening as she watched the awe in his eyes. "It is beautiful, is it not?" she asked, her voice carrying a touch of pride. "Xenara holds secrets that even I have yet to uncover. It is a world that thrives on mystery." "It's unlike anything I've ever seen," Ethan admitted, turning to face her. "But I don't understand why you chose me for this arrangement. I'm no one important, not here. What do you gain from having me by your side?" Shira's smile was faint, her eyes glittering like the crystals that adorned the palace walls. She moved to the edge of the balcony, resting her hands on the railing as she gazed out at the jungle. "You are not important to my people, it is true," she said, her tone thoughtful. "But that is precisely why you are valuable to me. You come from a place beyond our borders, a world that my people have only heard of in whispers. They fear the unknown, and through that fear I can guide them towards something greater." Ethan frowned, trying to piece together her meaning. "You think you can use me to unify your people? How?" Shira turned back to him, her expression now serious, her voice dropping to a more confidential tone. "There are factions within my kingdom, those who believe I am leading Xenara into ruin by seeking to modernize, to open our borders to new ideas. They see you as a symbol of that change, a reminder of what lies beyond our sky. By marrying you, I send a message to my people that I am unafraid of what lies beyond, that I am willing to embrace new possibilities, even if it means unsettling the old ways." Ethan studied her, trying to gauge the sincerity behind her words. There was a vulnerability in her eyes, a crack in the mask of the untouchable queen that he hadn't seen before. He sensed that she had more to lose in this alliance than she was willing to admit. It was a gamble for her, just as it was for him. "So I'm a political pawn," he said, a trace of bitterness creeping into his voice. "And if I fail to live up to your expectations, what then?" Shira's gaze held his, unflinching. "If you fail, Ethan, you will be cast out or worse. But if you succeed, you will earn a place in this world, a place by my side that is more than just ceremonial. Consider it a challenge, if you wish." Ethan let out a short, humorless laugh. "A challenge? That's one way to put it." He turned to look out over the alien landscape, feeling the weight of the situation settle into his bones. His life had been one of constant movement, always seeking the next horizon, the next frontier. But now he was tethered to this world, bound by promises he barely understood. Isira stepped closer, her voice softening, taking on a more personal note. "I do not expect you to trust me, Ethan, but I ask that you understand this: I am not your enemy. My duty is to my people, and I will do whatever is necessary to ensure their survival, even if that means relying on someone like you." Ethan met her gaze, searching for any sign of deception. He found none, only a fierce determination that mirrored his own. It was strange, he thought, how this alien queen, so different from anyone he had known, seemed to echo the same struggles he faced. Perhaps in their own way they were both searching for something more, a purpose, a future that extended beyond the boundaries of their worlds. He took a deep breath, nodding slowly. "I'll do my part, Shira. I'll learn whatever I need to, and I'll prove that I'm more than just an outsider. But I'll need you to be honest with me about what's at stake." A faint smile touched her lips, and she inclined her head in a gesture that felt almost like respect. "Then we have an understanding, consort. Welcome to the Game of Thrones that is Xenara." They stood together in silence for a moment, the alien wind whispering through the open windows, carrying the scent of strange blossoms. Below, the jungle stirred with the sounds of life, a world in motion, hiding secrets that stretched back to ancient times. In that silence, something shifted between them, an unspoken agreement, fragile but real. For the first time since his arrival, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that perhaps he could find a place for himself here. But as the twilight deepened and shadows crept across the land, he could not shake the feeling that danger lurked just beyond the edge of sight. The Zenaran palace, with all its crystalline beauty, held secrets that could turn friend into foe, and allies into enemies. And he knew that if he failed to navigate this new world, he would pay the ultimate price. But for now, with the alien queen standing beside him, the future seemed as open and unpredictable as the night sky. The days following the wedding ceremony settled into a rhythm that Ethan could only describe as surreal. He woke each morning in chambers far grander than any place he had ever called home, high vaulted ceilings carved from luminescent crystal, floors that shone like emerald glass, and walls adorned with intricate tapestries that told the ancient history of Zenara. Yet beneath the palace's splendor, he could sense the currents of tension flowing like an undertow. Every encounter with the palace staff was strained. The Zenaran servants, with their green skin and downcast eyes, moved silently through the halls, offering polite but distant bows. Their expressions betrayed no warmth, only a wary caution, as if unsure whether to view Ethan as a threat or an oddity. He understood their suspicion he was a stranger in their midst, thrust into a role they could not comprehend. His days were filled with duties he barely understood. Sira insisted that he accompany her to council meetings, where advisors draped in flowing robes debated matters of trade, defense, and alliances with neighboring clans. Ethan struggled to keep up with the unfamiliar political jargon, but Shira, to his surprise, took the time to explain things in quieter moments, guiding him through the complex web of Zenaran politics. Yet despite her efforts, Ethan felt like a ship adrift without a map, lost in a sea of intrigue. The advisors eyed him with thinly veiled distrust, their gazes cutting like knives. They spoke in their native tongue when they could, as if trying to keep him out of the conversation. And he knew that behind their respectful bows, they questioned his place at the queen's side. It was during one such council meeting on a day when the humid air pressed heavily against the crystalline walls that Ethan first noticed something amiss. Sira sat at the head of the table, her expression carefully neutral as she listened to a report from Kaler, her former advisor, now leader of the most vocal faction within the council. Kyler was tall and imposing, his skin a darker shade of green that almost blended with the shadows. His eyes glittered with a sharp intelligence, and his voice carried a commanding edge that demanded attention. "My queen," Kaler began, his gaze flicking briefly to Ethan before returning to Shira. "There are troubling reports from the Eastern Territories. Several of the smaller clans have withdrawn their support, citing concerns about your recent alliance with the outsider." His lips curled slightly, as if the word outsider left a bitter taste in his mouth. Syrah did not so much as blink at his tone. "Their concerns will be addressed in due time," she replied coolly, her fingers drumming lightly on the arm of her chair. "Zenara's future requires unity, not the isolationism that has held us back for centuries. Ethan's presence here is a testament to the possibilities beyond our borders." Kaler's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. "Or perhaps they see his presence as a sign of weakness, a sign that we have turned our backs on tradition in favor of uncertain alliances. They do not trust this experiment, my queen, and neither do I." Ethan felt a prickle of irritation at Kaler's dismissive tone. He opened his mouth to speak, but Shira silenced him with a glance. Her expression remained calm, but Ethan sensed the tension thrumming beneath her composed exterior. "Your concerns are noted, Kaler," she said, her voice smooth but edged with steel. "But I will remind you that the decisions of this council are mine to make. Zenara's future rests in my hands, and I will not allow fear to dictate our path." Kaler bowed stiffly, though the look in his eyes was anything but respectful. "As you wish, my queen," he replied, but Ethan caught the way his gaze lingered on him. A look that carried an unspoken threat. It sent a chill down Ethan's spine, a sense that this was more than mere political posturing. There was something deeper in Kaler's hostility, something that hinted at a darkness festering beneath the surface. As the meeting adjourned, Ethan followed Sira back to her private study, his mind buzzing with questions. The study was a quiet, intimate space filled with the soft glow of bioluminescent orbs that hovered near the ceiling like drifting stars. A wide window overlooked the jungle, where the trees swayed gently in the evening breeze, casting shifting patterns of light across the floor. Sira moved to a low table, where a pitcher of pale, amber liquid awaited, pouring herself a glass. She offered one to Ethan, who accepted it gratefully, savoring the cool taste that carried hints of something floral and unfamiliar. For a moment they stood in silence, the tension of the council meeting lingering between them like shadow. "What's his problem?" Ethan finally asked, unable to hold back any longer. "Kaler seems determined to undermine everything you do, and it's not just him. Half the council looks at me like I'm some kind of alien plague." Shira sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. She turned to face him, leaning against the edge of the table, her expression softening. "Kaler represents a faction that believes Zanara should remain isolated, untouched by the outside. They fear that any connection to worlds beyond our own will bring corruption, that it will erode our traditions. My choice to bring you here," she paused, searching for the right words. "It challenges their entire way of thinking." Ethan studied her, seeing the strain in the set of her shoulders, the lines of worry that marred her otherwise flawless face. He realized that her role as queen was not as effortless as it appeared. She was a woman caught between the old and the new, fighting to hold her people together, even as they threatened to tear her vision apart. "I can't change how they see me," he said quietly, his voice tinged with frustration. "But if they think I'm some kind of threat that could put us both in danger, Kaler doesn't strike me as the kind of man who would back down easily." Ixrai's lips curved into a wry smile. "No, he is not. But he is also too cautious to act openly against me, at least for now. As long as we present a united front, his influence will be limited." Ethan nodded, but a knot of unease twisted in his gut. He couldn't shake the feeling that Kaler's animosity ran deeper than simple political rivalry, and as the days wore on, he began to notice more signs that all was not well within the palace. He overheard whispered conversations between guards that fell silent when he drew near, caught furtive glances exchanged between the servants, and sensed the tension that hung in the air like an unspoken threat. One night, unable to sleep, Ethan wandered through the darkened corridors of the palace, trying to clear his mind. The halls were silent, the only sound the faint hum of energy that pulsed through the crystalline walls. He found himself drawn to a secluded wing of the palace, a place where the air felt colder, heavier with secrets. It was there that he stumbled upon a shadowy figure slipping through a side door, cloaked in darkness. Instinctively he followed, keeping to the shadows as he trailed the stranger down a narrow, winding stairwell. The path led him deep beneath the palace, into a maze of subterranean chambers that seemed far older than the rest of the structure. Ethan crouched behind a pillar, his heart pounding in his chest as he watched the figure meet with a group of others, masked figures, their faces hidden beneath hoods that glinted with metallic threads. They spoke in hushed tones, their words too low for Ethan to catch, but the urgency in their voices was unmistakable. He caught only fragments, mentions of rebellion, of striking before Shira could solidify her hold on the throne. As the implications sank in, Ethan's blood ran cold. He edged closer, straining to hear more, but his foot brushed against a loose stone, sending it skittering across the floor with a sharp clatter. The figures froze, their heads snapping in his direction, and in the flickering torchlight, he caught a glimpse of the leader's face, Kaler. Before Ethan could react, the shadows surged toward him, hands grabbing his arms and forcing him to the ground. He struggled, but the masked figures were too strong, pinning him down as Kaler loomed over him, a twisted smile curling his lips. "Well, well," Kaler murmured, his voice dripping with mockery. "It seems our guest has a penchant for wandering where he does not belong." Ethan glared up at him, refusing to show the fear that coiled in his chest. "You're planning to betray her," he spat. "You think she won't find out?" Kaler's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with cold amusement. "On the contrary, she will find out when it is far too late to stop us. You see, Ethan Blake, there is no place for outsiders like you in Zanara's future. And if you think your queen will save you, you are sorely mistaken." A swift, sharp blow to the back of his head cut off Ethan's reply, and darkness swallowed him whole. Pain throbbed through Ethan's skull as he regained consciousness, the taste of copper lingering on his tongue. His vision swam, blurred shapes coalescing into the cold, unforgiving stone of a dungeon cell. He struggled to push himself upright, wincing as the chains binding his wrists clinked against the floor. A faint, greenish glow emanated from veins of crystal embedded in the walls, casting eerie shadows that danced in the corners of the room. He blinked, forcing his thoughts into focus, remembering the ambush in the underground chambers. Kaler's smug expression flashed in his mind, along with the revelation of the conspiracy against Jaira. A bitter curse escaped his lips. He was in deeper trouble than he had ever imagined. The rebels had been planning this for longer than he realized, and now he was their prisoner, with no way of warning Shira about the danger lurking within her own palace. Footsteps echoed from the corridor beyond his cell, a rhythmic clack against the stone that grew louder as someone approached. Ethan steeled himself, bracing for another encounter with Kaler, but instead, a figure in a dark cloak emerged from the shadows, pushing back the hood to reveal the face of a young woman. Her green skin glowed softly in the dim light, her eyes a bright, unsettling yellow that seemed to pierce through the gloom. She crouched in front of the bars, her gaze assessing as she studied Ethan. "You are the Queen's consort, the human," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper, but it held a hint of urgency. Ethan frowned, struggling to place her face. "Who are you? And why are you here?" The woman glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting to be followed, then turned back to him. "My name is Naira. I serve the Queen, but I have learned of Kaler's plans. His rebellion runs deeper than you know. He intends to seize control of the throne before the next moon cycle, and he has already begun rallying the clans to his cause." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Then you have to get me out of here. If he moves against Jira while I'm stuck in this cell." Naira's expression softened with a trace of pity. "I would if I could, but Kaler's influence over the guards is strong. I barely managed to reach you without drawing suspicion. If they find me speaking to you, it will cost us both our lives." Ethan swallowed hard, trying to keep the frustration out of his voice. "There has to be something you can do. If Shira doesn't know what's happening, Kaler will use her trust against her. He'll strike when she's most vulnerable." Naira hesitated, her gaze flicking between Ethan and the corridor beyond, before she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There may be a way. Tomorrow night, Kaler and his conspirators will meet again in the old temple beneath the palace. If I can get word to the Queen, she might be able to catch them by surprise. But I cannot do this alone. I need you to create a distraction, something that will draw the guards' attention away from me while I send the message." Ethan nodded, the weight of the plan settling into his chest. "I'll do whatever it takes. Just make sure she knows what's coming." Naira offered him a brief, encouraging smile before retreating back into the shadows, her footsteps fading down the corridor. As he watched her go, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than nothing. What he couldn't afford to fail, not when Jira's life was at stake, and not when he had come to realize just how much she meant to him. As he waited for the hours to pass, Ethan's thoughts turned inward, to the complicated web of emotions that had grown between him and Zira. She was fierce and unyielding, but there were moments when her guard slipped, revealing glimpses of a woman burdened by the weight of her crown. He had seen those moments, seen the way she struggled to balance her duty with her desire for change. Since somewhere along the way he had come to admire that struggle, had found himself drawn to her in ways he had never expected. But there was no time to dwell on those feelings now. He had a role to play, and if he failed, Shira would never have the chance to confront Kaler and the traitors who sought to unseat her. The next night, Ethan paced his cell, counting down the moments until Nira's signal came. His wrists ached from the tightness of the chains, and his body was sore from the cramped conditions, but he ignored the discomfort, focusing on the task at hand. He had to create a diversion, something loud, something that would draw every guard in the vicinity away from the tunnels. At last, a shadow moved at the edge of his vision, and he caught a glimpse of Naira's silhouette slipping through the hallway. She nodded once, a quick, subtle gesture, and Ethan sprang into action. With all the strength he could muster, he slammed his shoulder against the cell door, rattling it in its frame. He shouted, his voice echoing through the stone corridors. "Guards, get in here, there's been a breach." He pounded on the bars with his shackled hands, creating a cacophony of noise that reverberated through the dungeon. He shouted again, letting desperation creep into his voice. "They're coming for the Queen. Do something." Within moments, the heavy thud of boots rang out, and 3 Zanaran guards rushed down the corridor, their expressions grim and wary. They unlocked the cell door, dragging it open as they stormed inside, weapons at the ready. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he saw Nira dart past them, her movements quick and fluid, disappearing into the shadows. He knew he wouldn't stand a chance against the guards, but he lunged at them anyway, using every ounce of strength he had left to buy Naira more time. The first guard struck him across the jaw with the butt of his spear, sending him sprawling against the wall, but he forced himself to stand again, bracing himself for the next blow. Pain lanced through him as the guard subdued him with ruthless efficiency, pinning him to the ground. But as his vision blurred and darkness closed in around him, Ethan caught a glimpse of Naira's silhouette disappearing up the stairs, slipping away to carry out their plan. He clung to that hope as his consciousness faded, praying that his sacrifice would not be in vain. Ethan woke with a sharp intake of breath, his body protesting with every movement. He was back in his cell, bruised and battered but alive. And when he opened his eyes, he found Shira standing before him, her expression cold with fury, but her eyes gleaming with something deeper relief, and perhaps a glimmer of admiration. Naira reached me in time, Sira said, her voice tight with barely restrained anger. She told me what you discovered, and I confronted Kaler myself. The temple is secure, and the conspirators are in chains. But you, she knelt beside him, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You risked everything to warn me, even when you had every reason to doubt my intentions. Ethan met her gaze, the anger in her eyes softened by the unspoken gratitude that lingered beneath. I couldn't let him take everything you've worked for. I couldn't let him destroy you. Exura's expression wavered, and for a moment her composure cracked. She reached out, her fingers brushing gently against his bruised cheek, a gesture so unexpected that it sent a jolt through him. You are a fool, Ethan Blake, she murmured, her voice trembling with emotion she couldn't quite contain. But you are a fool I am glad to have by my side. She helped him to his feet, her grip firm and steady, and for the first time Ethan saw the full weight of her vulnerability, the uncertainty that lay beneath the Queen's mask. He realized with a startling clarity that he had come to care for her, not just as a leader, but as a person, someone who bore the weight of a world's expectations, just as he had once borne the burden of survival. As Jira led him out of the cell and into the dimly lit corridors, the sounds of the jungle outside filled the air, a distant symphony of life. The palace was still, but there was a sense of change in the air, a promise that the danger was not yet over, but that they had survived the worst of it together. You should know, Exira said softly, as they walked side by side through the winding halls, that you are no longer merely my consort, Ethan. You are my ally in this struggle, my partner, and as long as you remain by my side, I will not let Zenara fall. Ethan glanced at her, a faint, weary smile curving his lips. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. They emerged onto the balcony that overlooked the jungle, the view stretching out beneath the pale light of the twin moons. The night air was cool against their faces, carrying with it the promise of a new dawn. And though the road ahead was fraught with danger, Ethan felt a sense of purpose settling in his chest, a determination that mirrored the strength he saw in Jira's eyes. Together they stood in the moonlight, two souls bound by fate and a shared vision of the future. For the first time since his arrival on Zenara, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that perhaps, against all odds, they could forge a path through the darkness that lay ahead. The palace buzzed with an uneasy tension in the aftermath of Kaler's failed coup. Ethan could feel it in every corner, in the whispers of servants and the steely eyes of Zenaran guards who patrolled the halls with weapons at the ready. The rebels had been captured, but their presence lingered like a shadow over the crystalline walls, a reminder that peace was fragile and easily shattered. The rebellion had not only threatened Jira's rule, it had exposed the fissures within the heart of Zenara itself. Ethan stood on the balcony overlooking the jungle, the early morning light washing over the vast sea of trees below. His body still ached from the beating he'd endured in the dungeon, but his mind was sharp, focused on the challenges that lay ahead. Sira had summoned the council for a final reckoning with Kaler and his followers, a trial that would determine not only their fate but the future direction of Zenara. Ethan knew that whatever happened today would define his place in this world, and he was determined not to let Shira stand alone. The door behind him creaked open, and Ethan turned to see Ezira stepping into the light, her emerald skin glowing softly in the dawn. She wore her crown of twisted branches with a regal grace, and her gown shimmered like the jungle leaves after a rain. Yet beneath her composure he sensed the weight of what was to come. Her eyes met his, and for a moment the formal mask slipped, revealing the exhaustion that lay beneath. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual, a note of vulnerability threading through the words. Ethan offered a small, reassuring smile. "As ready as I'll ever be. How are you holding up?" Zira's gaze softened, a rare moment of warmth in her otherwise stern expression. "It is not easy, knowing that those you once trusted would turn against you so readily. But I must be strong, for Zenara's sake. Kaler's influence has reached further than I anticipated. The clans look to me for justice, and I must deliver it if we are to heal the rifts that he has sown." Ethan stepped closer, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You won't have to face him alone. Whatever happens in that council chamber, I'm with you." The shadow of a smile touched Exira's lips, and she placed her hand over his, squeezing it briefly before stepping back. "Thank you, Ethan. Let us hope that your faith in me is not misplaced." The council chamber was filled to capacity when they arrived, the air thick with anticipation. Advisors, clan leaders, and elders had gathered, their faces set in stern lines as they watched Kaler and his co-conspirators being led into the room in chains. The rebels' expressions varied, some defiant, others sullen or fearful, but Kaler held his head high, his eyes gleaming with a dark pride as he met Sira's gaze across the chamber. Swire took her place on the raised dais at the front of the room with Ethan standing at her side. She drew herself up to her full height, her voice carrying the authority of a ruler who would not be swayed. Kaelor, son of Viren, she began, her tone echoing through the chamber. You are charged with treason against the crown, with conspiring to overthrow the lawful ruler of Zinara, and with endangering the peace that we have fought so hard to preserve. How do you plead? Kaelor's lips twisted into a sneer, and he stepped forward, dragging his chains with him. I plead guilty only to defending the traditions of our people, he said, his voice carrying a venomous edge. I have acted in the interests of Zinara, not in pursuit of power. It is you, my queen, who has betrayed us by aligning yourself with this outsider. You have forsaken the very essence of our world. A murmur rippled through the gathered council members, and Ethan could feel the weight of their eyes upon him, measuring, judging. He forced himself to stand tall, refusing to be cowed by Kaelor's accusations. Swire's expression did not waver. You claim to act in Zinara's interests, yet you would tear us apart with bloodshed and strife. You seek to drag us back into isolation, to reject the possibility of a future beyond our borders. Your actions have sown division and fear, not strength. Kaelor's eyes flashed with anger. Strength comes from unity, from the traditions that have guided us for centuries. You would cast those aside in favor of change that none of us asked for. And this human, this outsider, what does he know of our ways, our struggles? He has no place here. Ethan stepped forward, meeting Kaelor's gaze directly. I might not have grown up on Zinara, but I've seen the same struggles you have, he said, his voice steady. I've seen people fight to survive, to hold on to what they know. But clinging to the past doesn't make us stronger, it just makes us blind to what's possible. Zira isn't asking you to forget your traditions. She's asking you to believe that there's a future beyond them. Kaelor's sneer deepened, but Ethan saw uncertainty flicker in the eyes of the council members. He pressed on, his voice growing more urgent. If you push away every chance for change, you're only hurting yourselves. Swira is offering a way forward, one that doesn't have to come at the cost of who you are. And if you think I'm a threat just because I'm different, then you're not defending your people. You're just letting fear control you. Silence fell over the chamber as his words sank in, the weight of them hanging in the air. Swira watched the faces of the council members, her expression measured, as if gauging their reactions. She turned back to Kaelor, her voice as cold as the crystal walls that surrounded them. Your time for defiance is over, Kaelor. You will face judgment for your crimes, as will those who followed you. But know this, your rebellion has failed. Zinara will not fall to fear and division. We will move forward with or without you. A murmur of agreement rose from the gathered council, and for the first time Kaelor's composure wavered. He glared at Shira with a hatred that burned bright and hot. You may have won today, but this is not the end. Others will see through your lies, and when they do, you will wish you had listened to my warnings. Zira's eyes narrowed, and she nodded to the guards. Take him away. His words hold no power here any longer. Kaelor was dragged from the chamber, his threats fading into the distance, and a tense silence settled over the room. The council members turned to Shira, waiting for her to speak, waiting for the decision that would shape their future. Ethan felt the tension radiating from her, saw the way her hands clenched at her sides before she raised her head and addressed the council. We have weathered a storm, and we will face many more before our future is secure, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. But we will face it together, as a people united by the desire for a better tomorrow. Zinara's strength lies in its ability to grow, to adapt, to become more than what it was. I ask you, all of you, to stand with me in building that future. There was a pause, and then one by one, the clan leaders nodded their assent. It was not unanimous, and the shadows of dissent still lingered in their eyes, but it was a beginning. Shira met each of their gazes, offering a nod of her own, and Ethan could see the determination that burned within her, a resolve to see her vision realized, no matter the cost. As the council dispersed, Ethan and Jaira found themselves alone in the empty chamber, the echoes of the trial still reverberating through the air. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, turning to face Shira with a small, weary smile. You did it, he said softly. You held them together even when everything was falling apart. Shira's shoulders sagged, the weight of her authority slipping away for a moment. She closed the distance between them, her gaze searching his face, as if trying to find the words she had kept buried. And I could not have done it without you, Ethan. You have become more than I ever expected, more than I dared to hope. Her words sent a warmth spreading through his chest, and he reached out, cupping her face with a tenderness he hadn't allowed himself to express before. You're stronger than you know, Shira, but you don't have to do this alone anymore. For a moment they simply stood together, two souls bound by the trials they had faced, by the sacrifices they had made. And as the first rays of sunlight spilled through the chamber windows, illuminating the crystal walls in a cascade of colors, Shira leaned into his touch, letting the mask of the queen fall away. "Perhaps," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "there is hope for us yet." Ethan pressed his forehead against hers, drawing strength from the closeness between them, from the promise that lay unspoken in the space between their breaths. Whatever challenges awaited them beyond the walls of the palace, whatever new threats might rise, they would face them together. And as the dawn broke over Zinara, bathing the world in a new light, Ethan knew that their story was far from over. But for now they had won their place in it, and the future uncertain as it was held a promise of something more. Final statement: in the end, Ethan and Jira find not only strength in each other but a chance to reshape their world. They have faced betrayal, fought for survival, and emerged stronger for it. Together they stand on the threshold of a new era, ready to build a future that bridges the gap between their worlds, where hope and change are no longer distant dreams, but a reality they will shape side by side.